Breaking news tonight. The West Wing is paralyzed in an unprecedented crisis that has left President Donald Trump cut off from his most trusted advisors, sending shockwaves through Washington and beyond. In the last 48 hours, something extraordinary has unfolded. A federal judge's emergency order, triggered by explosive revelations in an ongoing investigation into alleged election interference and foreign influence, peddling, has effectively barricaded the president from key members of his inner circle. The target is none other than Trump himself, isolated under the guise of national security protocols that bar direct communication with advisors implicated in the probe. This isn't just another political skirmish. It's a full-scale institutional lockdown that has frozen operations in the heart of American power. The breaking event stems from a late-night ruling by Judge Elena Ramirez in the D.C. Circuit Court, who issued an injunction citing clear and present danger to ongoing Justice Department investigations. The order, handed down just hours ago, mandates that Trump cease all contact with advisors like Rudy Giuliani, Steve Bannon, and Jared Kushner, who are now designated as potential witnesses or co-conspirators in a sprawling case involving classified documents, hush money payments, and ties to foreign entities. This decision was made behind closed doors in an emergency session convened after whistleblower testimony leaked to the press detailing how these advisors allegedly orchestrated a shadow network to influence policy decisions. The timeline is dizzying. The ruling came down at midnight following a day of frantic appeals from the White House legal team, all denied in rapid succession. This is not routine procedure. This is not standard political conflict. This only happens when confidence in the executive branch collapses entirely, signaling a profound loss of control. Institutional behavior now indicates a shift to enforcement mode, with the Secret Service and FBI agents stationed at key entry points in the West Wing, monitoring all communications and physically preventing advisors from entering the premises. The paralysis is palpable. Staffers wander the halls like ghosts. Meetings are canceled and the daily briefing room sits empty, its podium gathering dust. Phones ring unanswered. Emails pile up in inboxes marked restricted. And the once bustling nerve center of the administration has ground to a halt. Powerful forces have moved against the president, not with fanfare, but with the quiet efficiency of a system activating its safeguards. As the news breaks, the air in Washington thickens with tension. Reporters cluster outside the White House gates, their cameras trained on the dimly lit windows of the Oval Office, where Trump is said to be pacing alone. His usual barrage of tweets silenced by the court's gag order on related matters. Insiders whisper of a president furious yet cornered, his legendary deal-making skills rendered useless against the ironclad legal barriers now in place. This unprecedented signal from the judiciary isn't just about protecting evidence. It's a declaration that the protections afforded to the presidency have limits, and those limits have been reached. The loss of patience from the courts is evident in the ruling's language, which accuses the administration of willful obstruction and warns of contempt proceedings if violated. Preparation for force looms on the horizon as federal marshals stand ready to enforce the isolation. This move has ripple effects. Policy decisions on everything from trade negotiations with China to domestic infrastructure bills are stalled, with deputies scrambling to fill the void left by the absent advisors. The West Wing, once a symbol of unyielding executive power under Trump, now resembles a besieged fortress. Its inhabitants cut adrift in a sea of uncertainty. What we are witnessing has never unfolded like this before. A sitting president effectively quarantined from his own team, forcing the machinery of government to sputter and stall. By the end of this night, the situation may look irreversible as allies begin to distance themselves, sensing the shifting sands beneath their feet. The betrayal is already underway, with former staunch supporters in the Republican Party issuing cautious statements that stop short of full-throated defense. Silence from key figures like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Mike Johnson speaks volumes. Their usual rallying cries replaced by vague calls for due process. Private reactions among GOP insiders are described as panic-stricken, with whispers of damage control plans being hastily drawn up in smoke-filled rooms on Capitol Hill. Public loyalty, once a given in Trump's orbit, is now hedged with qualifiers like if the allegations are true, signaling a quiet exit strategy for those who see the writing on the wall. They know what is coming. A cascade of legal actions that could dismantle the administration piece by piece. This turning point marks the moment when politics gives way to survival instincts. No longer are party leaders defending Trump with the fervor of past battles. Instead, they're positioning themselves for a post-Trump era, calculating the political cost of continued association. The airwaves buzz with speculation. Will this isolation lead to resignations en masse, or will it galvanize Trump's base into action? For now, the West Wing remains in limbo, its paralysis a stark reminder that even the most powerful office in the world is not immune to the rule of law. As the hours tick by, the nation's capital holds its breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop in this historic drama. The legal and power cascade activated by Judge Ramirez's order is swift and unforgiving, setting in motion a series of enforcement mechanisms that could culminate in unprecedented actions against a sitting president. This action triggers contempt proceedings if any communication attempts are detected with potential outcomes including asset seizures, account freezes, or even arrest warrants for those who defy the isolation mandate. The removal process looms large as whispers in Congress suggest impeachment articles are being dusted off, ready to be deployed if the crisis escalates. One move now forces the next through legal obligations and automatic triggers embedded in federal statutes, creating a domino effect that no amount of executive privilege can halt. Behind the scenes, institutions are acting in coordination with the Justice Department, FBI, and judicial branch moving in lockstep to enforce the ruling. This suggests a shared belief that resistance from the White House is weakening as Trump's legal team files emergency appeals that are summarily rejected by higher courts. The strategy phase has shifted to containment and isolation, with objectives focused on controlling the narrative to prevent misinformation campaigns and locking positions to avoid any escape routes for the implicated advisors. Damage limiting is in full swing as leaks to the media paint a picture of an administration unraveling from within, further eroding public confidence. The escalation phase is upon us, and we can expect a flurry of public defiance statements from Trump surrogates still outside the net, emergency filings in sympathetic courts, and counter orders from loyalists in the executive branch. Global reactions are pouring in. Allies like the UK and Israel express concern over U.S. stability, while adversaries such as Russia and China watch with thinly veiled glee, positioning themselves to exploit the chaos. The power struggle now shifts from politics to enforcement, rhetoric to mechanism, and loyalty to survival. As staffers weigh their options in hushed conversations, former allies are no longer defending Trump with the same vigor. Instead, they're issuing statements that hedge their bets, praising his past achievements while distancing from the current scandal. Party leaders in the GOP are convening emergency meetings, their silence on the matter a calculated move to assess the fallout. Insiders report private reactions of outright panic, with some advisors quietly updating their resumes and seeking legal counsel of their own. The political meaning is clear. They see what is coming. A potential constitutional showdown that could redefine the boundaries of presidential power. As the West Wing remains paralyzed, the broader implications ripple outward. International institutions like NATO and the UN are monitoring closely with briefings on how this internal U.S. crisis might affect global alliances. Credibility damage to the American legal system and executive authority is mounting, raising risks of diplomatic isolation as partners question Washington's reliability. Markets are jittery with stock futures dipping in after-hours trading amid fears of policy gridlock. Security repositioning is underway as military leaders brief on contingency plans should the paralysis extend to national defense decisions. This is no longer a story about one person. It's a test of the system itself. Outcomes now narrow to enforcement of the law, potential collapse of the administration, or a historic confrontation that could drag on for months. After this moment, nothing returns to normal. The trust between the branches of government is fractured, and the precedent set here will echo for generations. The situation is now accelerating out of containment, with each passing hour bringing new revelations that tighten the noose around the isolated president. In the Oval Office, Trump sits alone, his usual cadre of confidants barred from entry, forcing him to rely on a skeleton crew of untested aides. The air is thick with uncertainty as memos stack up unsigned and calls from world leaders go unreturned. This isolation isn't just physical, it's psychological, chipping away at the aura of invincibility that has defined Trump's political career. As the night deepens, the nation watches, wondering if this is the beginning of the end for an era that has divided America like never before. The isolation order has now entered its second full day, and the fractures within Trump's inner circle are becoming impossible to ignore. What began as a legal technicality has morphed into a full-blown test of personal allegiance, with advisors forced to choose between loyalty to the president and self-preservation in the face of mounting federal scrutiny. Those barred from the West Wing, Giuliani, Bannon, Kushner, and several senior policy aides, are no longer simply sidelined. They are actively distancing themselves through carefully worded public statements and private maneuvers that signal a slow, painful unraveling of the once ironclad Trump orbit. Rudy Giuliani, long the president's most vocal defender in legal battles, issued a terse statement this morning declaring he would respect the court's process while continuing to fight for truth, a phrase notably lacking any direct mention of Trump or promises of unwavering support. Steve Bannon, ever the firebrand, posted a single cryptic message on his War Room platform. The system reveals its teeth when the king stands alone. History remembers who stayed silent. The subtext was clear. Even Bannon, who built his brand on unrelenting loyalty, is hedging. Jared Kushner, meanwhile, has gone completely dark, with sources close to the family confirming he has retained independent counsel and instructed aides to avoid any White House-related communications. This shift is not accidental. Behind closed doors, the advisors are receiving urgent briefings from their own attorneys, warning of potential indictment risks if they maintain contact. The court's order includes a broad no-contact clause that extends to intermediaries, meaning even passing messages through family members or low-level staff could trigger contempt charges. As a result, a chilling effect has taken hold. Text threads once buzzing with strategy have gone silent. Encrypted apps show last-seen dates stretching back to the moment the ruling dropped, and group calls that used to run late into the night now ring empty. The White House staff, caught in the crossfire, are exhibiting classic signs of institutional panic. Mid-level aides report being instructed to route all policy questions through acting deputies rather than attempt to reach the president directly. The Situation Room, usually a hive of activity during crisis, sits eerily quiet, with only skeleton crews monitoring routine alerts. One senior official, speaking on condition of anonymity, described the atmosphere as like working in a museum after hours. Everything looks the same, but nothing moves. Memos pile up on desks. Decisions languish unsigned, and foreign leaders' calls are either rerouted to the State Department or simply left unanswered, further amplifying perceptions of executive dysfunction. Publicly, the Republican Party's response has hardened into two camps. The die-hard MAGA wing continues to rally online, flooding social media with demands to free Trump and labeling the court order a deep state coup. Yet, congressional leadership remains conspicuously restrained. Speaker Johnson released a single-sentence comment urging swift resolution through proper channels, while Senate Republicans have deferred all questions to the Judiciary Committee, which has yet to schedule hearings. This caution is telling. Senior GOP strategists are privately advising members to prepare messaging for a post-Trump landscape, with internal polling showing growing fatigue among swing district voters over prolonged legal drama. The psychological toll on Trump himself is becoming visible. Those with limited access, primarily Secret Service detail, and a handful of cleared communication staff, describe a president alternating between bursts of furious dictation, which cannot be acted upon without advisor input, and long periods of brooding silence. The famous late-night tweet storms have been replaced by handwritten notes passed to aides, many of which never leave the Oval Office due to legal review requirements. This enforced solitude is stripping away the real-time counsel that has defined Trump's decision-making style for decades, leaving him to grapple with complex international and domestic issues largely in isolation. As night falls in Washington once more, the paralysis deepens. Emergency lights flicker in otherwise darkened corridors, and the iconic silhouette of the White House against the Capitol sky now feels more like a monument to stalled power than a beacon of authority. The question hanging over every conversation in the city is no longer whether the isolation will end, but how much damage will accumulate before it does, or if it ever will. The paralysis gripping the West Wing is no longer a domestic spectacle. It has become a global event with immediate and far-reaching consequences. International partners and adversaries alike are recalibrating their postures toward the United States as the absence of decisive executive leadership creates dangerous vacuums in policy execution. NATO headquarters in Brussels convened an unscheduled session this afternoon to discuss contingency planning should prolonged U.S. dysfunction delay critical decisions on Ukraine aid packages and Baltic deterrence posture. European diplomats speaking off record expressed growing alarm that America's internal crisis could embolden Kremlin adventurism at precisely the moment unity is most needed. In the Indo-Pacific, Japanese and South Korean security officials have quietly reached out to Pentagon counterparts seeking reassurance that routine defense commitments remain intact despite the White House blackout. Beijing, meanwhile, has adopted a posture of watchful opportunism. State media outlets are amplifying coverage of the American constitutional disorder, framing it as evidence of systemic decline. Chinese diplomats have already begun testing boundaries with increased naval activity near Taiwan and renewed pressure on Philippine outposts in the South China Sea. Moves that would normally provoke swift U.S. diplomatic pushback, but now meet only silence from a leaderless executive branch. Financial markets are reacting with increasing volatility. The Dow futures opened sharply lower this morning before recovering slightly on hopes of a quick appellate reversal. Yet bond yields remain elevated as investors price in the risk of sustained policy gridlock. Multinational corporations with heavy exposure to U.S. regulatory decisions are delaying major capital expenditures, citing uncertainty over trade, tax, and energy policy directions. Currency traders report unusual hedging activity in the dollar, with some analysts warning that prolonged executive paralysis could erode confidence in America's institutional stability, a cornerstone of the dollar's reserve status. Domestically, the tremors are even more pronounced. State governors from both parties have begun issuing public statements asserting their own authority to fill perceived federal voids, particularly on border security and emergency disaster response. Several red state attorneys general have filed friend of the court briefs supporting the isolation order, arguing that it protects ongoing investigations from potential executive interference. In blue states, governors are accelerating implementation of policies that diverge from anticipated Trump-era priorities, effectively creating a patchwork of de facto federalism while the center remains frozen. Civil society organizations on both sides are mobilizing. Progressive groups are launching nationwide Defend the Rule of Law rallies, while conservative activists organize stand with Trump convoys converging on Washington. The potential for street-level confrontation is rising, with law enforcement agencies in the Capitol already on heightened alert. Social media is ablaze with competing narratives, one side portraying the court order as the final act of a long-gunning witch hunt, the other hailing it as the long-overdue triumph of accountability. The information environment has become so polarized that even basic facts about the ruling scope are disputed in real time. Within the intelligence community, unease is palpable. Senior officials are quietly reviewing continuity of government protocols, concerned that critical national security decisions could be delayed or mishandled during the paralysis. Reports indicate increased monitoring of foreign adversary activity, with particular focus on cyber and influence operations designed to exploit the current moment of American vulnerability. The risk of miscalculation by either domestic actors or foreign powers grows with each hour. The executive branch remains effectively decapitated. This is the moment when abstract debates about checks and balances become concrete and perilous. The world is not merely watching, it is adjusting, repositioning, and in some cases, probing. America's adversaries sense opportunity, its allies feel uncertainty, and its own citizens confront the uncomfortable reality that the most powerful office on earth can be rendered temporarily impotent by the very institutions designed to protect it. As the third day of isolation dawned, the situation has moved beyond containment into an accelerating phase where every decision or lack thereof carries historic weight. The appellate courts have so far upheld the lower ruling, with the D.C. Circuit denying emergency stay requests in blunt language that leaves little room for optimism among White House lawyers. A final appeal to the Supreme Court is expected within hours, yet even conservative justices have signaled reluctance to intervene swiftly in what many view as a straightforward enforcement of judicial process. The constitutional machinery, once a source of stability, now appears locked in slow-motion collision. Inside the West Wing, the skeleton staff operates under extraordinary strain. Acting chiefs of staff rotate in exhausting shifts, attempting to triage the most urgent matters while knowing their authority is severely limited. National Security Council principals have resorted to written briefings delivered through cleared couriers, a cumbersome process reminiscent of 19th century governance. Major policy initiatives, tariff adjustments, regulatory rollbacks, Middle East diplomatic initiatives sit frozen, their fate dependent on a president who cannot confer with the very experts needed to execute them. The betrayal narrative has solidified. Insiders confirm that several former loyalists are cooperating with investigators, providing detailed accounts of Oval Office conversations and decision-making processes. These developments have shattered the remaining illusions of unbreakable loyalty within the administration. Even among those still nominally supportive, private conversations reveal a growing consensus that survival now requires distance rather than defiance. The once feared retribution for disloyalty has lost its sting when the machinery of government itself appears to be turning against its chief executive. Public opinion is shifting in measurable ways. Recent polls show approval ratings dipping below 40% for the first time in the term, with independents citing inability to govern as their primary concern. The base remains energized, yet turnout at support rallies has been noticeably smaller than in previous crises, suggesting even committed supporters are experiencing fatigue. Meanwhile, opposition voices grow louder, framing the moment as proof that no individual is above the law, a message resonating beyond traditional partisan lines. The closing frame is stark. This is no longer a story about Donald Trump alone. It is a stress test of American democracy's core architecture: separation of powers, judicial independence, executive accountability, and the system is showing both resilience and fragility in equal measure. Outcomes have narrowed to three paths: swift enforcement that compels compliance and potentially ends the crisis through legal finality; prolonged collapse as paralysis erodes institutional legitimacy; or an unprecedented historic confrontation that forces a fundamental redefinition of presidential authority in the modern era. Whatever path is taken, nothing returns to normal after this. The precedents established, whether through compliance, defiance, or judicial escalation, will reshape the boundaries of power for decades. Trust between branches already strained may take generations to rebuild. The West Wing, once the unchallenged center of global influence, now stands as a cautionary symbol. Even the strongest office can be humbled when the institutions designed to check it finally act in unison. The situation is irreversible. It is accelerating, and it is for the moment out of containment.